Ronna McDaniel is out at NBC News. The network announced her hiring late last week, which prompted massive outcry from on-air talent at the network. And now NBC has caved and is ending its relationship with the former RNC chairwoman. Perhaps this move will appease Chuck Todd, Joe Scarborough, and Rachel Maddow, who all savaged their own bosses for hiring McDaniel in the first place. Here was Maddow reacting to the news of the hiring a few days ago.
It's my understanding that MSNBC's leadership did not object to Ronna McDaniel being hired by NBC News when the matter first arose. But when the hiring was announced, and MSNBC staff essentially unanimously and instantly expressed outrage, our leadership at MSNBC heard us, understood, and adjusted course. We were told this weekend in clear terms, Ronna McDaniel will not be on our air. Ronna McDaniel will not be on MSNBC. And I say that and give you that level of detail because there has been an effort since by other parts of the company to muddy that up in the press and make it seem like that's not what happened at MSNBC. I can assure you that is what happened at MSNBC. Ronna McDaniel will not appear on MSNBC. So says our boss since Saturday, and it has never been anything other than clear. And I will also say, you know, if you care what I think about this, I will tell you the fact that Ms. McDaniel is on the payroll at NBC News, to me, that is inexplicable. I mean, you wouldn't hire a wise guy. You wouldn't hire a made man like a mobster to work at a DA's office, right? You wouldn't hire a pickpocket to work as a TSA screener. And so I find the decision to put her on the payroll inexplicable.
And I'm joined now by The Hill's Niall Stanage to go over it. So I thought that was a pretty interesting clip, the kind of metaphor she makes there. I would respond to her saying, I mean, if you wanted information on mob practices from a journalistic standpoint, you might very well interview a former mobster to like even go down that route. I think it shows you the level of contempt the talent had for someone like Ronna McDaniel. But this is a pretty dramatic, immediate reversal at this network for the bosses. And I never understand why people in media or companies, they make a decision and then back down immediately. Doesn't it look a little cowardly?
It's certainly just an embarrassment, I think, to NBC News and MSNBC to have that immediate a U-turn on this. Now, I'm more sympathetic, frankly, to the Maddow argument than I think you are. I think that there is a difference between getting Republican or conservative voices on one hand and getting someone who was complicit in an attempt to overturn an election on the other. And I think that's what caused such outrage on the left, not just within 30 Rock about this. But it's embarrassing, and it's embarrassing in two ways. One is just the U-turn itself. The second thing is it does give, I think, conservatives a stick with which to beat NBC News, because they then say, oh, well, look, you just don't want any Republican at all on your air. And we've already seen people make that argument.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think right. It's not true that they don't want any Republican on their air, because they have tons of Republicans on their air, but it's a specific type of Republican that is not actually broadly representative of Republican or conservative thought. They have on Nicole Wallace. They have on Joe Scarborough. They have on, Liz Cheney's now Rachel Maddow's best friend. They have on Republicans who 20 years ago they had a lot of contempt for, the Bush Republicans, but now those are the quote-unquote good guys from the kind of liberal media establishment perspective. And look, I think it's fine to interview those people, but those people are just not broadly representative of where conservatives are. Most conservatives do like Donald Trump and agree with most of his policies, and frankly, on the election stuff is where you have the most mixed feelings, I think, among conservatives. It's certainly held him back what happened in the election, and that he wants to constantly relitigate it is clearly something Republicans want to talk about the future, not the past. But to understand that mindset and to understand where actual Republicans are coming from, I think McDaniel has a very ideal perspective for that, and I think it's fine to challenge her. And in fact, she was challenged in that interview with Welker on Meet the Press the other day. I thought it was a great interview, and they're acting like it's harmful to the country to even to not just hear her perspective. Again, they're not just like let her talk unfettered for hours. That's not what was in the mix. They were going to challenge her. They were going to call her out, and for them to act like that whole even that project would be hostile to what they're doing journalistically. It strikes me as that is almost what's wrong with maybe the whole cable, maybe not just MSNBC, but the whole cable news environment, where you're just talking to people who agree with you already.
Well, let me take that point and then get to the other ones. I do think you raise a really good point about the type of Republicans who are acceptable on MSNBC. Those are the same type of Democrats who are acceptable on Fox News often, right?
Sure.
There is no position more profitable than to be a heretic in a certain way, right? And so Fox News loves to get Democrats or liberals or people who at least claim that label on to be critical of wokeness or various other DEI type things or whatever. Similarly, Nicole Wallace at this point in her career or Liz Cheney are clearly not representative of the Republican Party. Liz Cheney got absolutely annihilated by Harriet Hageman in a primary, a person who was basically unknown. Now, there is, I think, a more difficult question, which is there are around about 3/4 of the Republican voters in this country who think that President Biden's election was illegitimate. They are factually wrong. What do you do with that? How do you simultaneously reflect or get insight into that position while not feeding lies to your audience?
Sure, and that is an incorrect position. I absolutely agree. But of course, but nobody gets any flack, and I'm not going to, draw any kind of false equivalency here. But Jen Psaki has her own show on MSNBC. She arranged it while she was still working in the White House for Joe Biden. That was part of the issue they raised here with Ronna McDaniel. Well, she came straight from the RNC. Like, that's never happened before. That's crazy. Jen Psaki came straight from the White House, and she and a lot of other Democrats who are featured prominently and who are still in good standing did not go to nearly the same extent as Trump and Trump people did, but had feelings after the 2016 election that it had a shadow of illegitimacy over it because of Russia. Jen Psaki was one of the people who I remember her tweeting that the laptop was Russian disinformation, that kind of thing. They have, again, Nicole Wallace and other people who were complicit in really bad decisions with respect to the Iraq War 20 years ago. And I'm not saying any of these people should be unpersoned or canceled or you can never hear from them again. I think they might have valid perspectives that I disagree with. So I don't know. I would push back on the idea that, I'm sure there's lots I disagree with with Ronna McDaniel, including her role in the election stuff. It's just, to me, that's not so fundamentally different from the rest of this cast of characters who are political operatives who lie, cheat, and steal, and all of the rest. I
think there is a real issue right now as well, because we have the sitting president for whom Jen Psaki worked running again for a second term, and his predecessor also running, to get back in again. To me, that changes the dynamics around these things in a way that was not true, say, George Stephanopoulos obviously worked for then President Clinton. That's a generation ago. That's different to what we have now. It's a really tricky thing as to how do you get insight that you think has integrity along with it? Or do you just say, well, forget about all that, it's just more profitable to feed people what they already know and to offer up, red meat every night?
Well, it's definitely not profitable to do this. Actually, we should talk about this. So she's not going quietly and frankly shouldn't.
Right.
She is maybe, I think, talking to one of those attorneys that helps people, on-air talent who have been exited, including Megyn Kelly, et cetera. She, I think, was going to be paid, what is this? I think it was $300,000 per year. And so she's still seeking that amount of money, which will make it she was on camera for 20 minutes in that interview she did with Kristen Welker. So this is like the per minute payment they're going to have to do if they pay her out is incredible.
It's extraordinary. It's Taylor Swift numbers there per minute, right?
Just a really, really own goal just to screw this up. Again, they didn't have to do this, and they stood by her, and then had this total staff revolt. And I don't know. I think you end up looking really weak and really foolish when you say, oh, we want to reach maybe not reach a different audience, but at least give voice to a segment of the country, and then everyone on camera says, absolutely not, no way, and you say, okay, never mind, sorry, don't hurt me.
But did they say don't give voice to a particular segment of the country, or did they say don't give voice to election lies?
Well,
I know that those two things overlap, to say the very least, but they're not quite the same thing to my mind, Robbie.
Yeah.
And I think that's where now, how do you get people someone who speaks to the Trump base without engaging in that stuff? I don't know.
You can just ask her about it. I mean, she did get asked. I thought it was interesting, the part of the interview where she was asked about her relationship with Trump, and she was pretty forthright in saying that obviously Trump doesn't like me very much anymore, and didn't like that I maintained we were going to do debates and we were going to have an actual process. He didn't show up for them, but we did the debates. And she said, her equivalent on the other side, there were no debates between Joe Biden and Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson and et cetera. So I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue and a big embarrassment. I mean, just a terrible decision-making process.
Indeed. All right, stick around. We'll have more Rising right after this.